show you a little tip that I was given today by Todd Kopriver from Adobe. This is actually something I did know, and I used this technique when I made this animation, but I'd since forgotten. So let's just hide this movie. Now, in the previous lesson, I showed you how to reset a pin by double-clicking the keyframe and then just setting values in the X and Y. And that's in fact the long way to do this. The short way is to simply move the time indicator over the pin that you want to change, and then in the Effect Controls panel, making sure the puppet effect's selected, just click Reset. And that will reset that pin. If you click Reset again, that's going to reset the entire effect. So click once to reset the pin and twice to reset the puppet effect. So thanks, Todd, very much for that tip. Alright, so let's get on with the background. First of all, let's just take a look at this layer here, Gold Gradient. I'm just going to turn on its visibility and solo it. This is just a shape layer, and I've created it by just selecting the rectangular shape tool and dragging a new shape in the comp. Just going to undo that. What I want to do though is I want to create a second gradient, which is a green gradient, and we're going to sample the colors from the can for the green gradient. So I'll duplicate the gold gradient and rename this one green gradient. Just twirl the layer down. Twirl down gradient fill, and I'm going to click on Edit Gradient. Now I can use this ink dropper tool to sample the colors from the can. So at the moment, this pin's selected, so I'm going to choose the darker green for that. This green down here. And for the top, I'm going to choose the lighter green from here. Something like that. Okay, so now I can turn the can off. And you can see that we have two gradients, one on top of the other. Okay, so now I want to switch between these two gradients to the beat of the music. And we can do that by animating the opacity of the green layer so that it switches off and we see the gold gradient below. Just undo that. First of all, we need to right-click on the music and choose Keyframe Assistant, Convert Audio to Keyframes. And this creates a new layer in the timeline named Audio Amplitude. And if I press the U key, you can see we have a left channel, a right channel, and both channels. And there's a keyframe on every frame. And this is giving me just values that match the amplitude of the audio. At the moment, this layer is not doing anything, and it won't do anything until we link it up to another property. In this case, we're going to link it up to opacity. So I've soloed opacity, and I need to see the keyframes on this layer too. I might just maximize this panel. Alright, so I want to link the opacity up to the both channels property, or the slider under both channels. So I'm going to just option click to create an expression and grab the pick whip and drag up to slider. And you can see the value is quite low, 7%. Let's just come down to here. And it's quite difficult to see what's happening because that's just not transparent enough. See 2% down there. So we need to multiply this returned value by a number. So if I say multiply by 20, now we've got a value of 31. Let's just have a look at this. We get up to 100 there. If we just preview this, so now you've got the gradient's opacity animating to the beat of the music and revealing the gold gradient below. So a really nice, quick, simple way to create a base for the animation. Alright, so that's our base. Before we move on, we'll just select these two and pre-compose. Name these gradients. And you see what I did? I pre-composed without including the layer that has the audio amplitude, so it broke my expression. So just undo that. And the expression is probably still going to be broken, so if I press EE, that will reveal my expression. No, it's not broken anymore. The undo seems to have fixed it. So I want to pre-compose the gradients with the audio amplitude, but I'm going to need the audio amplitude layer for the grid layer inside this comp. So I'm going to duplicate that and just drag it down there, select these guys, and pre-compose. I'll call this gradients. Okay, so now that hasn't broken that expression. If you didn't want to keep duplicating audio amplitude, we could always link across compositions to one single audio amplitude layer, but it's just as easy to duplicate it because this music's not going to change. Okay, so what do we need to do next? Next, make a new solid, and I'll name this fractal underscore, oops, let's just try that again. Fractal underscore grid, and apply the fractal noise effect. Alright, so let's just take a look at how to create those blocks. First of all, from noise type, I'm going to choose block, and I'm going to take the complexity right down to 1. You could enter 0, but 1 is the minimum. And you can see now I just have a grid of blocks. Just want to get rid of these little slithers of blocks on the side, so I'm just going to drag the middle here and just try and even that out a little bit, just to be a little tidier around the edges. Okay, so what I want to do now is increase the contrast, just really take that right up to about 600, something like that, and also increase the brightness. Because what I want to do here is only have a few blocks and the rest of the layer white. And you can see how by increasing the brightness, now we're just left with a few blocks here. No animation at the moment, so we're going to use evolution to animate the blocks. So I'm going to create another expression. And for automatic animation, I'm going to type in time and multiply that by 200. Let's preview that. Now this isn't animating to the music, it's just got its animation from the evolution property here. But it still kind of matches the beat of this music. Alright, so next we'll add the grid effect. And by default we lose our fractal effect. So what I'm going to do is choose blending mode normal. Now we can see it on top of the fractal. And I'm going to change the color so we can see the grid a little better to a light gray. Okay, so now we want to line this grid up with the blocks. That's pretty easy. I guess you could use some mathematics, but it's very easy just to drag the anchor point to the corner of one block, the top left corner, and the corner property to the bottom right of a block. Just eyeballing it here, just getting it pretty close. You can see it looks kind of out on the left and the right, but what we can do is just take these corner values and just hold down the command key or control on Windows and just fine tune by using the up and down arrows. It doesn't have to be perfect. It looks pretty good. And let's just change the Y. Just moving that up a bit. It's pretty close. Got this one here. Just takes a little bit of twiddling. Like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect. That's pretty good. I think we can get that a little bit better than that. Just zoom in here. Need to have the effect selected. Okay, for our purposes that's close enough. But like I said, you can fine tune using the numeric values. Alright, so we could increase the border value here. What we want to do though is link the music up to the border. And that'll make it look like the blocks of the fractal are pulsating to the music or scaling up and down to the music. So I'm going to just give myself a bit more space here and just move the audio amplitude to the top. just reveal the keyframes there, and maybe just maximize this panel. And twirl up fractal noise and twirl down grid. Create an expression for border and drag it up to the both channels slider. Let's take a look at that. Okay, so now you can see that the grid is now animating to the beat of the music, but you might notice that when the grid is at its finest, it almost disappears. So we don't want the grid to disappear, so we need to just adjust the expression slightly. So to have the grid have a minimum value of at least 3, or 3 plus whatever the border expression value is, I'm going to type in 3 plus, and just click away. And now the border will have at least 3 plus whatever the return value on the expression is. In this case, it's 3.5. Let's take a look at that. Now that's pretty good, but I still think we could make it chunkier. And just not enough chunky areas. A lot of it's really fine, and we can do that by multiplying the return value. I'm going to multiply this by 2. Okay, so now we're getting a lot chunkier areas in the grid animation. And you could play around with this. You could set this for however big or however fine or thick you wanted the border. But I think the important thing with this is to really exaggerate the border so that it's really obviously pulsing. Otherwise it doesn't look quite as good as it could. Next we're going to create a new solid, and we're going to combine that with this fractal layer as a matte. And the color I'm using here is red 155, green 156, and blue 39. It gives me this kind of a greeny yellow, or a medium grey yellow according to After Effects. Just going to leave that as that name, and just going to stick it below the fractal grid. And just toggle switches and modes, and I'm going to use the fractal grid layer as a matte for the solid by choosing Luma Inverted Matte. It's just high gradients. So this is what we get. So oftentimes it works well with these kind of layers with fractals and grid to use them in black and white or in grayscale, and then use them as mattes for other colored layers. I want to combine this with the background layer. At the moment it doesn't look quite right, so for the medium grey yellow solid I'm going to choose multiply. Okay, now you might have noticed that in some areas, let's just undo that, we're still seeing some edges here which we don't want to see, so I think we've got to increase the minimum size of the grid. So let's just select the fractal grid and maybe make this 5. Okay, so that just disguises those gaps. Like I said, you could probably enter some numeric values that give you a perfect square and a perfect fit, but in this case it would be a waste of time because you're never going to see it. Eyeballing works just fine. Just make that multiply again. Okay, looking good. Let's just do one more RAM preview. So as you can see, we haven't actually set any manual keyframes yet. We've converted the music to keyframes by using the Convert to Audio Keyframe Assistant,